Folks, we're looking at Edge magazine. Hold on a sec. Which number is this? It's not on the cover. This would be 23, released in August 1995, and unfortunately it's not discussing the future of interactive entertainment. At least I don't see it on the cover. Now seriously, I never bought this issue in the stores. I bought it secondhand on eBay. And this is how the cover looks according to all the pictures I could have found of this issue. But I'm pretty sure that this issue came with a plastic bag revealing extra information, because a lot of it is cutting away the number, their slogan, and it's just a mess, this. I mean, what are you supposed to look at? Well, here you see Sega Saturn on one of the chips. So, okay, let's look at the other chips. Something about Geoff Claremont. Oh yeah, he's the guy who made Sentinel Returns, or The Sentinel. Howard Lincoln, Commodore. Some numbers. I don't get this. Oh, Magazine of the Year. Yeah. Now this is a somewhat an odd cover, and I think it's supposed to be complemented by a plastic bag. What you don't see on the cover, the big news, is of course E3 1995, the very first one, and the one with the biggest, most amount of drama. Most interesting things to be here, because this is 1995, at the height of the console, 32-bit console wars. The opening column is about the Saturn, and they're not doing that well, apparently. Or are they? Well, they're selling just as well as the PlayStation in Japan, so that's a good start. But yeah, there are signals that the Saturn might be having trouble. And they mention how that Sega's been relying on guerrilla tactics, like selling their console way earlier than PlayStation in order to get a head start. The truth is, so far, 3 of the games featured for the Saturn had PlayStation titles which were simply better, like Virtua Fighter not being as good as Tekken, Daytona not being good as Ridge Racer, and this cyber racing game, I forgot the name, and a Grand Tracer, which would later be called Cyber something, not looking as good as Wipeout. So some concerns for the Saturn already. Yeah, Sega would lose a lot of money on the Sega Saturn and the 32X. Okay, so yeah, so there were 2 big reveals during the E3. First of all, during the conference, right at the start, Sega said, yeah, we're selling the Saturn already. We started it yesterday in certain retailers. People are like, oh my god. Okay, so you can get your Saturn already, not in September, but now in July. And yeah, that was one of the big reveals. The other one was Sony PlayStation only saying one thing during their conference, namely $299, which meant the console was $100 cheaper than the PlayStation. That was a big thing, of course. We also see 3DO boasting some virtual reality. Can I get a sharper image? It's like this dome of sorts. And Jaguar would have something similar, which you see here. And this one was kind of sad, because they said, yeah, it's going to be $300, but everybody knew, at least all the press knew, that this was not running on Jaguar technology. So who are these two trying to kid? 3DO also had apparently a lot of games shown, but none of them seemed to be good except Blade Force, and Blade Force was never released. So yeah, that's 3DO for you. We see some prototypes for the M2. Now this one I already knew, but I've never seen this one. Weird looking joypad. That was also never released. Which game is on attract mode? It's Crash and Burn apparently for the 3DO. Has a nifty intro. So yeah, the Batmobile here. I heard that Seal actually had a little concert for Nintendo at the E3, but Nintendo didn't have any other really big things to say in the Nintendo no-go. And the Virtual Boy was shown there, of course, in Killer Instinct for the Super Nintendo. But nothing people were hyped about, and the Edge doesn't have much to say about it. So Amiga is going the way of the dinosaur. Still supported by fans to this day, but SCOM, as far as I know, did not turn Amiga's future around. So 1994 was the official end for that brand of computing. A book about understanding hypermedia, which must be totally outdated by now because this was written in 1994, before the World Wide Web became a big thing. The Toy Expo in Japan. Well, we see the Pippin, which was a ludicrous idea to have, a system for Macintosh games. And we see some future interesting titles for the, coming from the East, but I actually don't recognize any of them. World Advanced War. Is it an Advanced War game? I don't know. Legend of Thor wasn't as good as the original. Okay, so there's some speculation about how well the Sony, the PlayStation and Saturn will sell, and Japan now has a 1 million sold unit version of the Saturn, which would have Virtua Fighter Remix, a better looking version of the Saturn game. So the first letter is fascinating. It's actually from somebody who works for Sony, and he's replying to a letter that somebody wrote to Edge Magazine, debunking 5 statements made in that letter. So yes, Sony getting hands-on with their PR there. Somebody talking about how well the Super Nintendo has aged with the FX chip games, Donkey Kong Country, and soon enough Super Mario World, and 32X not doing well, of course. Where are all the advertisements for the Jaguar and the commercials on TV? Well, that's because Atari didn't have the money. And let's see, somebody's saying, yeah, 8-bit games had all the gameplay we ever wanted, and why doesn't Edge pay more attention to older games? Because they were better anyway. And Edge says at the time, we're mostly focused on the future of video games, but Edge would change that stance, and now they write quite a lot about the video gaming past. It's a good thing too, because they surely have the best pen in the journalist industry. There's also a magazine called Retro, and that's also by Future Publishing. I occasionally buy that. Considering I'm such a video game historian, I think I should buy that every month, but I don't like it that much because most of the stuff I already know. Urban Decay was never released. It's by the same people who made Ecstatica, which you can probably see by they're not polygons, what are they called again? Well, all these round shapes. From what I read, it's kind of like Deus Ex. It's an action-adventure game where your choices would have implications. Unfortunately, never released. Instead, they focused on Ecstatica 2. You can tell this is an early alpha build. So, Mortal Kombat 3 coming to the PlayStation. Apparently, the people who made this game planned beforehand to make sure it would work well on PlayStation hardware, and it sure did. The loading times were sometimes a bit awkward. And Edge laments the graphics, saying this game looks outdated. Why would people play this? You have Tekken, but this game definitely looks better than Tekken. So, but that has more to say about. Has more to do with how people didn't know how to use polygons back in the mid-90s. This was a big thing for PlayStation owners, by the way, because the Saturn didn't have them. They got Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate. So, Wipeout and Destruction Derby, both made by Psygnosis. I hope I pronounced them correctly. And Wipeout, which changed the game for futuristic race games. And Destruction Derby, racing game where you crash into other cars. Both very popular on the original PlayStation. Philosoma was a PlayStation shoot 'em up, and not very well regarded. It wasn't bad, but not worth remembering. Now Z, that's an interesting game. I think this was still made for the Amiga, but also for the PC. No, it was for the PC, but it looked very much like an Amiga game. And it's made by the Bitmap brothers, who used to make all their games for the Amiga. And this is one of the earlier real-time strategy games, and if you ask me, it's just as good as Command and Conquer. But you know, Command and Conquer had better press, so but it got very good reviews, and it's a shame that the Bitmap brothers, they're just not a big company, so they never were able to penetrate the, at the time, very busy scene. A lot of real-time strategy games coming out at the time. So an ad for Rare halfway through the magazine. Twisted Metal, another game that sold very well for the PlayStation 1. I never liked it. I would be rather playing Doom or a proper 3D shooting game. The Twisted Metal series ended with the PlayStation 2. I guess people started realizing it's kind of lame to be riding a car and shooting at each other. But that was a cool thing to do back then. Solar Eclipse. I believe this game ended up with the title Titan on the 3DO, and it's an on-rail shooter. No, it's for the Saturn. I'm sorry. It was made by Crystal Dynamics, who made a lot of games for the 3DO, but this one was for the Saturn. And it's just another pretty on-rail shooting game, and I think that's all there is to say, because it wasn't that interesting. You were better off playing Panzer Dragoon. Virtual Cop, another on-rail shooter, but at least it's kind of cool with all the polygons. It was kind of fun to play in the arcade, though I never really liked it. But that was a thing for the Saturn. Yoshi's Island. Now this is a classic. Some of the best graphics ever made in a video game. At the time, you had to get used to it. I was like, geez, what kind of graphics are these? But once you play, you realize that everything is atmosphere. And it might be the best platform game of all time, really. The later versions of Yoshi Island for all the other systems could never improve upon this game. And check it out. It's everything a Mario platformer can be. So, Super Nintendo, going out strong. Okay, so here's an interview with Geoff Crammond. He's a British programmer. I think he makes all his games alone. And he hasn't made a game since 2002 or 2004. So his career was, he made The Sentinel, which was a huge game. It's still one of the best games ever made. He made Stunt Car Racer in 1988, which was a really cool race game. And you might know Stunts. Well, that's a lot like Stunt Car Racer. And he was always busy making racing games. And in 1991, he made Formula One Grand Prix, which was a huge game at the time. Easily the best racing game ever made. And of course, there was also like F-Zero, but that's not realistic. As a racing sim, was easily the best. And now he's showing off Formula One Grand Prix 2, which was also a huge success. Unfortunately, him working by himself, and even though his physics engine remained excellent, his company never really had the marketing and the pizzazz to continue to dominate. He made the third version in the year 2000, but by then Electronic Arts was making Formula One games. I believe Sony was making a lot of racing games at the time. Formula One was really hot at the time. And then he made a fourth one in 2002, and that was like for the PlayStation 2 or something. And again, the same thing, just too many Formula One games. What's interesting is that apparently Schumacher used the original Grand Prix game to actually learn the tracks for his future career. So yeah, you can use video games to help your career. Okay, so we're running out of time. We'll briefly look at this part about Sega's plan to attack. So they were trying to get Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn, and they had to do everything differently because it's a confusing piece of technology. But they learned from their mistakes of Virtua Fighter 1, and they were going to make Virtua Fighter 2 kick-ass, and I think they did very well. So some talk about how to develop games for the Saturn, and we'll leave it at that. See you next time.